name is Caroline Kasaya. I am an associate of Northern Nairobi region, basically living in Kasarani. And I am delighted today to have this opportunity and chance to share with us all on wisdom for living in times of crisis. We are going to look at a couple of Bible verses, but especially looking at 5 things which we need to put into our minds and think about even as we engage any crisis. In our day and time today, we are engaging COVID-19 as a pandemic that is around the whole world. But in every other daily living, we encounter crisis from time to time. And I hope that these 5 points are going to be useful to you. In my reflections about COVID-19, and indeed many other crises, I have come to realize that it is important for us to be armed with wisdom for living. The Bible tells us that the knowledge of God, the fear of God, is the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom for living is what we need right now, especially as we engage life in these interesting times. So I'm going to give us 5 points, as I said, and I acronym them or gave them the 5 A's to be able to deal with COVID-19 and especially any other crisis that you may be facing right now. And I'm going to start off with the first A, and the first A is accept. To accept means to admit that there is an issue, there is a problem. We are having many times with people putting or burying their heads in the sand like the proverbial ostrich, whereby they are saying that, this thing is not there, or you are just ignoring it, or even ignoring the directives that have been put there. The first thing for you to manage and to live wisely in any crisis, whether it's a crisis of health, a crisis that's financial, a crisis that is political, is to accept that the crisis, the problem, the issue is actually happening. And by admitting, we are then putting ourselves in the right space to be able to seek help from God. Psalm 121 is a very interesting psalm. And the writer is saying, I lift my eyes, in Psalm 121 from verse 1, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? This is a psalm of a traveler, somebody traveling to Jerusalem or wherever it is that he was going. And the journey towards Jerusalem was not an easy journey. It had mountains, it had valleys, as the people ascended towards the hill of God. And so they look up and say, where does my help come from? Psalm 121, the traveler is moving towards Jerusalem, he is surrounded by these hills. And therefore he knows that his help can only come from the Lord. Because in the hills there are dangers, there are things that are going to cause him crisis. And therefore by admitting that he needs that help, then he is able to actually look up to the right place. Therefore accepting and admitting that we are in a crisis helps us to be able to move on and helps us to look at the possible strategies and the possible areas in which our help can come from. The second thing, after we have admitted and accepted that we are in a crisis, whatever it is that you may be facing right now, is actually to assess and adjust. Assessing means that looking at our resources. And in looking at our resources, we are not just thinking of financial, even though right now, the first thing that anybody, including myself, during this period was to think, wow, how much money do I have in my bank? How much do I have in M-Pesa? What can be liquidated quickly? Because when the pandemic started, it spelled almost doom and, just feeling like things are not going to be okay. And therefore, that's why you saw people panic buying, especially the panic buying of tissue paper and oil and cereals. I actually have a friend who is a greengrocer, and he told me that on that day that the pandemic was, the COVID-19, the first test was done, the first result was found in Kenya. Somebody actually went and ordered vegetables worth 1,000 Kenya shillings to store in their freezer. Therefore, people are assessing. You need to assess. You need to know, yes, you need to know how much money you have. But I think of utmost important is also to know other resources that include your spiritual bank. What do you have? What do you have that can be a resource to you now in terms of dealing with the jabs and the darts that the enemy is going to send to you, the darts of fear, of discouragement? What do you have in your spiritual bank? What do you have in your social bank? Who are the friends that you can call on to right now in case your money has run out, in case your child is sick at night, in case you need any help, even just to talk? What do you have in your emotional bank? And this is a wonderful time to assess and to know what it is you have. And many times I want to tell us that when we assess, we will find that we will fall short. It is only God who can fully complete us. Therefore, as we assess, we need to adjust. For instance, as we assess our finances, we know that we need to adjust. If we are used to eating out or buying clothes and shoes every time we go to the market, even a local market, then you know that you need to cut that back and be able to save, because the future continues to be uncertain. And therefore, it is important for us to be able to gather, to galvanize our resources, all resources. Sit down as a family. Sit down as friends, even if you're doing it on Zoom or WhatsApp or calling each other or meeting across masks. I think it's important to have this time to reflect and assess that which we have, because it is from our point of our weaknesses, the things that we have or have not, then we will know that it is God who has given us that power to be able to be like that, but also giving us an opportunity to develop ourselves. After assessing and adjusting in no particular order, then we need to look up to the hills. It doesn't mean that you start looking up now, but looking up to heaven. And looking up to heaven has the connotation of asking for help. But before we even ask God for help, one of the wise things I've learned in this time is to sing praises to God, is to worship God, is to ascribe greatness to the Lord our God, because our God is mighty. The Bible in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 3-4, and I will read, says, I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. In Jeremiah chapter 32, reading from verse 17-20, you may have that time, but I love this one. It says, sovereign Lord, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and outstretched arm. Just acknowledging the power, the majesty, the ability of God, that even if we are faced by this pandemic, as we are being faced by it, it does not surprise God. God is not jostled and he's not falling off his throne because of this. In fact, God is choosing this pandemic so that we can raise our eyes to him, outstretch our arms to him, because he is, after all, our all in all. He is calling us out in a loud way to turn to him and give glory to him and worship him. So our focus should turn to God, who remains steadfast and unshakable. Our focus should be on the awness of God, and we should increase in our knowledge and in the awe of God. And our faith in God must grow and thrive. And as we grow, we ascribe greatness, because our God is telling us that is how to live wisely. The fear of me is the knowledge, is the beginning of wisdom. The fourth A is to be attentive. One of the quotes that has been said over and over again as you listen to many speakers over this period is the C.S. Lewis quote, where he says that God whispers to us in our pleasures, very true. He speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. And it is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Be attentive. You will agree with me that the world has been deaf for some time. The calls of God have most often fallen on deaf ears. There's been mockery of God. There's been disdain and dismissal of God. But I want to give you a point of wisdom at this time. God is calling us to listen to our hearts. What are the longings that are in our hearts? What are the fears, the hopes, the persuasions that are in our hearts? We need to listen to God's call as we listen to our hearts. What is God's call? What is God's cry? What is God's condition for the world? What is our response to the cry and the call of God even in these times of COVID? What has God been saying? Remember that COVID is not the first pandemic. History tells us that there have been very many, and you can Google on that. But at every pandemic, every crisis, everything, God is doing something. God is re-engineering things. God is re-strategizing. God is redirecting. The question for 2020 Christians and people around the world is, what is God redirecting us to? In being attentive, we are called to listen to God's word. And in listening to God's word, we need to see that God's word is fallen. There's still some fallenness. We need to observe the frailty of human life, frailty of human wisdom and knowledge. And as we listen to God's word, we need to acknowledge the more that there's the need for a Savior, and that the Savior of the world is the one who is able to bring redemption in every area of our lives, so that our hearts should not just be broken and then walk away. It would be like the person the priest and the Levite who left the man dying on the road. I think we need to move to the next step of compassion, because it is through compassion that moves us. Then we are able to deal, we are able to help in a little way the issues that are there around us. The fifth and the final point is, the final A is on anticipate. And the only thing that keeps us going every day as we rise up every morning, even in the midst of any crisis that we may be facing, is the anticipation that things are going to get better, the word hope. And as we ascribe the greatness of God, as we assess our resources, as we are attentive, and as we admit that the crisis that we are facing is here with us, I think the important thing is to always have hope, and hope that does not disappoint. Faith, hope, and love, those three go together. Of course, we are told that the greatest is love. So in this psalm, the Psalm 121 from verse 1 to 8, the Lord's help is personal. The Lord's help is immediate, as you read. He gives his people strength. The Lord is able to help us to face the dangers that that are lurking around us. Another psalm that goes together with that is Psalm 91. God watches over us. God does not slumber. He does not sleep. God shades us during the day and even at night. God watches our life, whether we are coming or we are going. The word watches appears 5 times in those 8 verses. And I think we can live in hope because we know the God of the universe, the God, our Redeemer, the God who loves us, the God who has a plan for us, watches over our lives. So as we anticipate help from God. We anticipate that we'll be victorious over this current crisis and any crisis that you may be actually going through. We anticipate comfort because we know that COVID-19 and other crises are not devoid of pain, not devoid of suffering, they're not devoid of hurt. These things are accompanying those things for many, many people across this globe, even in our country, Kenya. Therefore, we anticipate that God will comfort us. We anticipate that God will be our joy. We anticipate his presence. We anticipate his mercies. We anticipate his miracles. And we anticipate his provision. I'm telling you that this crisis, and like any other crisis, God's plan is to change your heart, to give your heart a new direction. Do not lose this opportunity to hear from God, to experience his comfort, to experience his compassion, and to experience his provision. As we conclude, I want to say that we need to survive this crisis. We need to survive every crisis so that you can tell the story. And as we do that, we need to live wisely by accepting, by assessing, by ascribing worship to God, by being attentive to listen to what God is saying in you, through you, and out there, and then having hopeful anticipation. I am sure that we will be able to do what is right, live right, preserve our bodies and minds so that God's will can be carried out in and through our lives. Thank you very much, and may the Lord help us all as we live wisely in these times.